Lieutenant Hiroo Onada in 1974. 29 years after the end of World War II in the Pacific, Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onada gave up his war with the United States after his once commanding officer, Major Hoshima Taniguchi, assured him that the war had been over for 29 years. In 1944, Lieutenant Onada was assigned to the small Philippine island of Lubang. Although the Japanese was pulling out ahead of the U.S. military, Lieutenant Onada was ordered by his commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, to stay and fight a guerrilla war against the Americans once they take the island. He was also told that no matter how many years it took, they would come back for him. When the American Marines arrived on February the 28th, 1945, the 50 Japanese soldiers left under higher-ranking officers were quickly killed or surrendered. Lieutenant Onada and 3 others, Private Akatsu, Corporal Shimada, and Private First Class Kazuka, fled into the jungle, not knowing the Americans had the atomic bomb and it was bringing a quick end to the war only 6 months later. Within a few months, their rice supply had begun to run out. They had to live off the land by eating bananas, coconuts, wildlife, and whatever they could steal from locals, like their chickens and pigs. They were spotted from time to time. The soldiers thought the locals were siding with the Americans, and they would shoot at them. Leaflets were printed up, stating the war was over and they could come out. The soldiers didn't believe the leaflets, as the Japanese people would never surrender and would fight to the death. All 4 agreed it was a ruse and that they should keep fighting. Almost 5 years after the war ended, in 1950, Private Akatsu sneaked off from the others. Believing the war might be over, he turned himself in to the Philippine authorities. Again, the Philippine and Japanese governments dropped leaflets and stated that Private Akatsu was asking them to come out of the jungle and the war was over. Believing the Japanese people would never surrender, they convinced each other that Private Akatsu was a prisoner of war. He left notes where he thought they'd be seen, stating the Filipinos welcomed him as a friend. And as they was contemplating the note, a plane circled the area and they thought it was a trap and moved on. The government went to lengths tacking up pictures of naked women, hoping that that would entice them to give it up. But nothing worked. In 1951 through 1953, they would see jet fighter planes that the Americans were flying during the Korean War. They thought it was the Japanese military counteroffensive. In February 1952, letters from Onada's oldest brother saying the war was over and even had pictures of his family. Although Lieutenant Onada recognized his family, the house that they were standing in front of was not the house that he recognized, not knowing that the original house had been destroyed during the war. Therefore, he believed the picture was a fake. And in June 1954, Corporal Shimada was killed after patrol spotted him while they was out looking for Lieutenant Onada and his men. Lieutenant Onada had cut the head off one of the islanders, he said, just to frighten the enemy. During the years and many raids, the Japanese squad killed 50 and wounded 100 civilian islanders. In spite of this, the Japanese government was determined to keep their promise to Lieutenant Onada. They dropped leaflets and used loudspeakers. However, after Corporal Shimada's death, the soldiers were in no mood to surrender. And in 1959, the Japanese government declared Lieutenant Onada deceased. Having to clothe themselves as their uniforms were rotting, while on one of the many raids, they were able to obtain a transistor radio. They could hear the news, but they convinced themselves it was American propaganda. On October the 19th, 1972, while Private Kazuki and Lieutenant Onada was on a mission to burn rice fields, Kazuki was spotted by police and killed. A Japanese explorer and adventurer, Nora Suzuki, decided that he would try and locate Lieutenant Onada. Suzuki flew to Lubang Island and spent 4 days in the jungle, hoping Onada would find him. He said on the 4th day, Onada walked into his camp. Lieutenant Onada had been fighting by himself for 18 months. He said he would surrender only if his commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, would come himself and rescind his command. Taniguchi had been working for years as a book salesman in Japan. He flew to the Philippines and met with his former lieutenant. On March the 10th, 1974, Lieutenant Hiroo Onada, after 29 years of fighting the war that did not exist, received a hero's welcome on his arrival in Japan. He passed away on the 16th of January 1914 at the age of 91. He was given a full pardon for his activities against the Philippine people.
The shadows of Lubang's trees, a soldier's oath carried by the breeze. Years have passed, yet I remain bound by duty through sun and rain. Leaflets fall, tales of peace, but I perceive the enemy's deceit. Orders clear to never yield. I guard this land, my battlefield. For the land I hold so dear, I stand my ground, suppress my fear, awaiting word from voices known until my major calls me home. Through the silence, through the strife, I cling to purpose, sustain my life. A loyal heart, a watchful eye, under the vast Philippine sky. For the land I hold so dear, I stand my ground, suppress my fear, awaiting word from voices known until my major calls me home. Decades gone, yet here I stay, a soldier's duty to pager calls me home.